Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Week in Mormons International Edition. Again,
Woo!
for those watching my video, I apologize that you're going to see my profile sideways because of my desk setup today. But those listening in, well, that's completely relevant to you. Danny, we have Daniel Ferreira joining me today. How are you doing, Danny?
I'm very good. I'm happy that we're doing this. I'm here in the US right now, and things are lining up for Thanksgiving.
That's
I
right.
would say one of the biggest, celebrations in the US. I learned this week that it is by far the most traveled or the most, busy holiday in
Hmm.
the US. I mean, no Christmas, no Easter, no Independence Day will overcome the popularity of Thanksgiving. Everything's closed that day, so which is surprising considering the U.S. culture where there's a lot of hard work or work in general, like very limited holidays and just working hard and earning your way
Yeah,
to yeah.
this is
So
probably the
it's
one
interesting.
that, yeah, it's probably the one that brings the US to not a standstill, but the closest one to like really stopping things in the US from my experience there for Thanksgiving. I remember one of them, maybe the second one or third one there. I think the first one that I was not invited to to meet with anyone. So my wife and I spent it on our own. I think our daughter would have been like a newborn,
Okay.
and we're like, oh, we're just going to spend it on our own. That's nice family time. We don't have any traditions, so we didn't have a meal prepared or anything. We were like, oh, we're just going to go eat out. And to our surprise, everything was closed, and we hadn't gone to the
Yes.
supermarket earlier, and we're like hungry. Like we're like, oh, this thing really closes everything. We went to like McDonald's, Del
Everything's closed.
Taco, all
Everything
of the
completely.
places. Everything was closed. We were only able to find this place in between Provo and Orem, in University Parkway, if I remember correctly, called Mimi's Cafe, which was like a diner, like a TGA Fridays type place at
Okay.
like 8:30 p.m. and that one was open and they had like a Thanksgiving menu. So we were like, oh, finally we found a place, and we ended up having Thanksgiving dinner there, which probably sounds like uh like terrible for our US listeners. Sorry about that. I learned
But
the
but
hard way.
you got really lucky. I mean, last year we
Yeah.
for us something. I mean, we had an interesting set of invitations from board members, and then for whatever reason, we decided to do different stuff. But
Hmm.
then I think, yeah, it was that day for dinner. We thought, I mean, we can buy something, like we can go out and eat something. Because you're used to everything is open. I mean, 24 December, or as I said, Easter, or whichever, common world celebration. But not Thanksgiving. I mean, not even cars were around. I mean, everything was
Yeah.
absolutely dead. Like, I mean, people are with their families or in their houses doing their thing, but nothing is open. I mean, at
Yeah.
least here in New York State was absolutely dead. Like no place is open at all. So I think you got pretty lucky
Yeah.
in your U.S. experience for Thanksgiving. So I think it's a wonderful celebration, though. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
surprised that, and I think because it has this powerful tradition of giving things about things in life, then it's an opportunity for families to get together and to enjoy. And now that I'm here in a university, then of course you see kids, making their plans to fly or to drive to see their parents. I understand that this Wednesday is probably the busiest in terms of highways, like
Oh
everything's
yeah,
packed.
traffic and yeah,
Traffic, if
yeah,
you if a
airports too.
drive will
Yeah.
take you an hour, will take you 3 or 4. So it's just crazy.
Yeah, when I was at BYU, everybody wanted to rush and kind of leave as soon as possible, and it's just like that. Do you know what it reminds me of? Sorry, of Easter in Chile back in the day, like in the 90s or maybe early
Yeah,
two
sure.
thousands, when everything would like close and it was like a very long weekend, and people would travel, and you would see
So
the
you
traffic.
need to make plans in advance. Like, I
Yeah,
mean, you have to do your grocery shopping the weekend before. You need to have everything lined up and set up,
yeah,
because if you wait until the last minute, you won't find anything. Like, and
yeah.
mainly because there is certain traditions you need to follow in Chile uh, for
For Easter.
Friday.
Yeah.
or for the Friday, for the Holy Friday,
Yeah.
then you eat fish. That was a
Yeah.
tradition in Chile. You won't eat meat, right? So
Yeah.
you had to have something in advance, like frozen or whatever, because if not, you won't find anything like it on the day before or days previous from the celebration. So
Yeah.
something similar happens here. You go grocery shopping during the weekend before Thanksgiving, and you need to make sure you have your turkey, because if not, you won't find any
Yeah.
turkey, right? Those things, or the
Hmm.
stuffing, or I don't know, cranberry sauce or whatnot, right?
Yeah.
Like
The
all these
gravy. Yeah.
traditional things, the gravy and all these traditional things.
Yeah, I
It's so interesting.
remember the tradition for Easter, even though we're in November talking about Easter or just drawing the parallels with Thanksgiving,
Yes,
the tradition of eating fish only or seafood rather than meat is a Catholic tradition, or at least a Spanish Catholic tradition that is quite strong. And a quick anecdote: I got married. My the day of my sealing was on Good Friday, in Chile back in 2007, and the hotel where we did our reception, they had like the catering and everything prepared. When we went to try, we had like a taster session for different options for dinner,
yes.
and
The
we
traditional thing, yes, yes. You,
yeah,
you,
and all
you
of
need
the
to check what they're going to offer you, yeah,
yeah,
before
exactly. So my
the
wife and
event
I
happens.
went
Yes.
back then. My fiance, we went, and everything they were bringing to us was fish or seafood. And we're like, "Where's the meat?" And they were like, they were very hesitant. And then they said like, "Oh, it is Good Friday, and it's like we don't eat meat." And we were like, "Oh yeah, you're right, but don't worry, we do eat meat. It's fine," because in our, you know, Mormon
Culturally, it's
LDS
cultural.
tradition, yeah,
It's not even
you know,
religion. Yes.
yeah, in our Latter Day Saint tradition, we don't have that part of it. That comes from Catholicism, and back then, looking at my younger self, probably a little bit less kind of aware of other faith traditions and the how sacred they consider these things. I was taking it very lightly, like, oh, they don't eat meat, we do. Oh, that's so cool. And actually, we ended up having uh, beef, meat for dinner that day, and
You won
uh,
then. Yes.
yeah, but now in hindsight, I mean, I enjoyed it. I'll probably do it again, but I'm much more aware of, especially practicing Catholic people. Not that many of them, but those that are, um, that those little gestures are really meaningful. We do have things like that in our church. That if somebody would have treated those traditions the same way I kind of treated that tradition back then, I wouldn't be happy about it. So I think it's good to look around and to appreciate and respect the traditions of other Christian faiths and also other faith traditions outside of Christianity as well. Here in the UK, there's a massive respect for an integration of many of the traditions from Islam, from Hinduism, Buddhism, and even integrated in school curricula. Like here, there's a lot of traditions around Christmas. They do Christmas activities in school, things that in the US wouldn't happen because there's a whole like separation of church and state thing. And here I was surprised to see that. But also there's a lot of Diwali and Eid and things like that from other faiths
And
that is also
Hanukkah, and yeah, sure.
yeah, exactly, and that everybody kind of gets a fair shot at being included in religious education and all of that, and I appreciated that. It seems like an upgrade from the experience I had both in Chile and also in the US in terms of inclusion and inclusivity of religion in public life. That seems quite healthy. So kudos to the UK for that. And
And it helps the kids also. It helps the kids to be more aware of other
yeah,
cultures and other religious traditions. So that's all
yeah,
welcome and needed.
indeed. Yeah. One
Let's
thing
go
I
to
wanted
the
to say,
news.
and before that, Danny, I think
Okay.
our listeners deserve to know that today we were very, very close to a very historic milestone with Twim, which was that we were going to have the first, to my knowledge, the first episode where we would have three continents represented at the same time
That's
simultaneously.
true.
And even more than
Yeah.
that, were going to have a bit of time travel because our third host, Georgia Travers, was going to join us from Australia in tomorrow uh,
In
you know in
tomorrow's
in the
time,
next calendar
yes.
day. They're at 11
Yes.
hours ahead of me, um, and even more hours ahead of you, or like 16 hours ahead of you. And
So
she's
it's
visiting
crazy, yes.
Australia. Her husband is Australian. They've been there for the last 3 weeks or so. And we had everything ready to go. But unfortunately, over the last 24 hours, she struggled with some health issues. There are some bugs going around, and she couldn't join us. But she says hi to all of the Twim listeners, and you are just going to have to imagine her voice and accent today. But the news that we're covering today, a lot of those were
Chosen by
chosen by
yes.
Georgia. So a shout out to her. Get well soon, and hope to have you in an upcoming episode when you're well.
All the best for Georgia and all
Yeah.
the good wishes of recovery and good health, right? For
Yeah, I've been struggling
yeah.
with. Well, I had COVID a couple of weeks ago. Then lingering cold after that. I don't know if it was lingering symptoms from COVID, and everybody in the area has seemed to be dealing with some bugs. I don't know how it's been there, but
Yeah, I
it's
mean
that time of the year.
the fall here is yeah, it's the time of the year. It's tough. It gets very very tough, and I think we all need to be mindful about we're not getting any younger, so we need to be aware of diseases and making sure that we're
Yeah,
protecting ourselves.
take your
Uh,
vitamins, as President Nelson said. Take
yes,
your vitamins. It's going to be
and getting your
exciting.
vaccines as well. Yes,
And your
your
vaccines.
flu shot. Yes, your flu shots and all. Yes.
And yeah, let's go
So
to the
we've got
news. Yep,
very, very interesting news for this episode because very,
very
I would
eventful
say,
week.
historic, eventful week. Yeah, and first of all, we've got President Ballard funeral, and I
Yeah,
think it deserves some time on our end. Talking about his life, his impact as a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and of course, as a very successful businessman and a very successful, you know, I would say defender or a person that was
steward.
able
Yeah.
to to show the church into different spheres, different from church spheres,
Hmm.
but also in terms of the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things about Elder Ballard is his relentless capacity to talk about missionary work. I think when I think of him, I think of missionary work,
Yeah.
and that's fantastic because I mean I served a mission 23 years ago, 22,
Hmm.
and it's been a long time. And the most powerful things I remember from him are missionary work, and once you serve the mission, you kind of think that your service is done, and kind of you shouldn't be that concerned or worried about missionary work. But I really honor and value those members that are missionaries for life, I've thought about it, and I've um, repent myself many times about it, because sometimes I just think, no, but I don't have that missionary spirit. But I think we all have it if we look for it, and we try. And President Ballard, for me, his name resonates as missionary work in church, and I'm thankful for what he did in that sphere,
Yeah.
as a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
It's very similar for me, and thanks for your kind words. Every time an apostle or a member of the first presidency passes away, it's a very eventful. I mean, it's a very significant event uh, for a few reasons. One of those is that they hold so much influence and in our organization, and they're kind of structurally. I mean, we talk about scriptures that the church is founded upon the foundation of apostles and prophets,
Yes.
Christ being the chief cornerstone, if I'm paraphrasing that correctly, from the New Testament. So they're quite significant, but also they live long lives. At least that's been the
95.
trend. Exactly, he was 95
95.
years old,
Yes.
so they accumulate a ministry that is very long. And we're going to talk about kind of the age element a little bit in this conversation. But ever since uh, for all of the months of my life that I've been alive, except like 3, he has been an apostle. I think he was called in October 1985. I was born in July 1985.
So
And so that made me realize that all of the apostles that were called before I was born were already dead. But he's the
dead.
first
Yes.
one that was called during my lifetime that now passes away. So it's all of those years of ministry plus the years before that, plus the influence of his wife Barbara Ballard as well, who was quite influential as well in kind of in that world of spouses of apostles. And one thing with Elder Ballard, from my kind of experience growing up and kind of going through my youth years and then my young adulthood, and now not as young adulthood with him as part of the 12, is that he always came across, for me at least, as a very simple apostle in terms of how he communicated. Like he's one of those that I didn't feel was preaching or speaking with like this church accent of, kind of sounding spiritual and or trying to sound in a particular way. All of his messages were very succinct and to the point and very practical, and
And I
and
think
that was a unique thing about him.
let me comment something about it. I think probably this is my take, but because of his business experience, he understands that language is essential to convey the message, right? And the clearer you convey the message, the more effective it's going to be in terms of reaching those that need to listen to it, right? I mean,
Yeah,
if you use all this very unique expressions from the church, if you use all this, vocabulary that's so LDS, it's
yeah,
going to be difficult to reach other audiences, right? While he's, again, probably his business experience allowed him to understand that it is important to be clear and to get to the point, like, I
yeah,
mean, you can do all this, rounds and try to use this fancy words, this Sunday morning words to explain things, but in the end, what really matters is that people that listen to a message feel the
yeah,
spirit
yeah.
and understand what you want to invite them to do. I think we don't need to forget that a message not only teaches you something, but invites you to action, right? And no matter what you're talking about at church, you need to
Mhm.
leave an invitation. And I think he was very good at that. I mean, he actually, in in all of his messages, he was capable of providing insight and teaching a principle, but most importantly, leaving an invitation, right?
Yeah,
And again, we don't need to forget that we can improve the way we communicate. We can improve the way we make people feel, but what really matters is that they're invited to action, and he did it.
yeah.
he
And
he, he really was good at it.
that was a trademark of his ministry. I agree 100%. And also to close a little bit on our kind of reminiscing of Elder Ballard's influence, President
Honoring
Ballard,
our
and
honoring,
honoring, yeah,
yes.
it's
Yes.
that he was very influential and probably unbeknownst to most members. And some of the articles that have come out both from the church news and other sites kind of recapping his service and his life point that out. Even in his funeral, some of those things were pointed out. His influence in missionary work, as you said before. I didn't know that he was, I don't know if in charge, or at least quite involved in the development of the missionary guide, the one that came out in the 80s and that preceded Preach My Gospel. And
Hmm.
so as well with Preach My Gospel, the original one, and even this revision from just a few months ago of the second version of Preach My Gospel. So he was directly involved in those with some of the other fellow apostles. I think Elder Holland was the chair for the first Preach My Gospel. He was in charge of the, how do you say this, sesquicentennial anniversary of the pioneers arriving to Utah in 1997, which, even though it was before the internet really exploded, and it was when I was a kid, I was a deacon that back
Hmm.
then in 97. I remember that like it was an event that actually got the whole church involved, even in remote Chile. I remember all of the events that took place, and he was the chair of all of that. And not only that, he remained involved pretty much for life on some of that work. I don't have the details, but I remember that he sponsored and championed the dedication of um, some monuments just a year ago or two, maybe, of some of the black pioneers that arrived with the Saints in the 1800s to Utah, to Green Flake and others that took part in that, and that, with the course of history, had been nearly erased from the narrative and had lacked that recognition. And even this last year or the previous year, I can't quite remember when, he was the one there presiding, already on kind of weak health and quite old, but he
Yeah, but
he
still
really carried on that
involved,
message.
yes.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and also a message of inclusion that cross racial boundaries in that case, and also some of the most needle moving words in terms of our understanding of and an appreciation of the needs of LGBTQ members and their experience came from him. There are some really, I think there was a CES devotional or training that he delivered just a few years ago, 2015, 2016. Can quite don't have the quote with me now, but where he calls uh, CES people, I guess, the audience there, and by extension, I think it applies to all of us, to do a much better job of understanding the experiences of LGBTQ saints, and to listen more rather than judge more, and things like that. I'm paraphrasing now as well, but much of that, like when you think of Elder Ballard, maybe that doesn't come to mind straight away. But now that we have a chance to look back, you can see all of those fingerprints of his service as one of the 15 members of the 12, and more than 15 over the years as he started, and now he's getting out of it on the other side of the veil.
Yes.
It's great to see that, and in a way that, at least for me, didn't feel like he was trying to gain any attention into himself, but in a really succinct and really humble way. And we've talked about a lot of the good. I think the last few months have also uh, kind of brought to the public attention some of the bit more complex elements dealing with Elder Ballard, with this whole Team Ballard fiasco that has been on the news so much, which we haven't covered really in the international episodes, partly because it remains quite local, but it is still of kind of church-wide significance. We might not have the time to delve into that a lot, but it's been called into question how much he would have been involved, or would have been swindled, or or kind of deceived by this whole scandal, and the things that happened with this man Tim Ballard, which I hope does not tarnish the legacy of Edward Ballard in his apostolic ministry, right? But it does serve as a reminder that if many of the things that have come out are even partially, there's an element of truth in those, it does show that these are human people, right? And
And people
that,
trust people, and I think as members we trust other fellow members, to be doing good, and again finding ways to extend the message. I
yeah,
think sometimes we are so focused into what happens in our words or in our communities that we forget that our mission also is to extend uh, the good news of the gospel to
mm,
everyone, right? And whichever way we find to do it, it's welcome and is needed and is useful. And in the process of doing so, when you trust other fellow members, you never see their
mhm,
plans or their plots,
yeah,
which of course makes us think that sometimes you just get trapped into other people's plans. And I don't know, it
yeah.
sometimes it's just
Maybe
it
that one
worries
is
me that we're so trusting with each other. Yeah.
yeah. I think it's.
But it's
I mean,
it's the way it should be also. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, we,
What
we
can we
have
do?
we have in the record in recent decades the cases of Mark Hoffman and his kind of
Yes, the
cunning,
forgery.
and the
Yes.
forgery of documents, and the likes of President Hinckley and others that actually fell for it, right? So
Yeah.
it is a reminder that even our apostles and prophets are subject to being, what's the word?
There's no infallibility in them.
Yeah,
They're human, and as human, again, as I said, we're trusting people. I think
yeah,
I've been raised as a member, and I trust people. I mean, I trust people until they prove me wrong, right? And sometimes you gotta trust. I mean, that's the way we've been raised, and the way
yeah,
we've been capable of doing many things as society. So anytime someone wants to damage the system or the structure, then of course damages the
yeah,
way we've conceived our interactions as human beings.
yeah.
So
And
taking into account, sorry,
no,
I was
no,
trying to
I was just going to say that on this whole Team Ballard aspect, since we went on a slight tangent, I think it would be great to cover it in an upcoming episode, or maybe a Patreon segment more in depth, because uh, I I don't know. I think some of our US listeners that have been much more exposed to that, close to the epicenter of all this news, might wonder how people like us might experience it from the outside. So yeah, I'll love to delve into that, but I feel like it's gonna take the whole episode if you go there.
yes,
um,
yes, it's
yeah, but
it's a tunnel that is going to take us
yeah,
some time to.
it's a big
Yes.
rabbit hole. Yeah, one thing I'll
Yes.
say is that I can attest that 99.9% of people over here have no clue what's going on. That can be good or bad. I mean,
Yeah, it's not
ignorance
an
is
international
bliss.
issue.
Yeah,
Yes, but it's
exactly.
not an international issue at all.
Uh,
Yes.
and people don't seem to care much, even if they find out. But for the 1% that might know, and also when we hear about the scale of the allegations and all of that, it merits some discussion. So we'll go there. We'll probably let the whole thing evolve a bit more when we have more breaking news around that story. We'll come back to that, and we'll give it the time it merits. On Elder Ballard. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I was thinking that. Yeah, I just wanted to transition to the fact that now that we're honoring Elder Ballard, we also need to consider that soon we're going to have a new apostle, and that's always good news in many aspects. And uh,
Succession.
yes, and
Yeah.
how this is going to evolve as Latin Americans by birthright. We're happy that we've got Elder Suarez, who is representing Latin America from Brazil,
Mhm.
but we're always curious about what if, we've got an
Yeah.
apostle from, I don't know, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, or Peru. I serve in Colombia, maybe from Colombia, uh, and that would be that is an international thing, because that's
A
something that
hundred percent.
involves us. We've got Elder Uchtdorf, that is from Germany. So I
Mhm.
mean, the church and its growth, exponential growth internationally, of course, has been including members from different latitudes, right? So
Mhm.
when thinking of a member of the Quorum of 12 Apostles, then it's only natural to think, well, maybe it's the time to see a Latin American apostle, or
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know, a European apostle, or someone
Yeah, or
that
Pacific
is not from
Islander,
Utah,
or
right? Yes, yes,
somewhere
someone
in
that is,
Asia.
yes.
Yeah, and on this, I have so many thoughts, so many thoughts. I'll try to control myself, but well, there were a few articles, by the way, that we'll link to regarding the whole apostolic succession topic, and this inevitable speculation that will come very likely until conference next year, right? But one of the articles from the Church News is that this last quorum of the 12 apostles was the sixth longest tenured in church history. So basically,
Whoa.
how many years they lasted without any changes, without anybody dying and being called. Do you know which one is the longest serving ever?
No, no, no idea.
I didn't know either. I thought I knew, but Quorum of the 12 only. It's a period in the 1920s to 1930s. I don't remember the exact dates. I thought it was
Like
actually
World War One,
kind of in
like
between
from
World
World
War
War
One,
One.
kind of Great Depression era.
Okay,
When John A. Whitsoe and James C.
okay.
Talmage
A
and
match, yes.
Joseph Fielding Smith was there. Kind of that
Very
group.
young. He was
David O.
called very,
McKay.
very young. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
that kind of that group, but and they served like 10 and a half years in a row with no changes. And the second one is the one of our childhood and youth years. So from 95 to 2004, when President Hinckley was called, all the way until
Oh,
Elder Maxwell passed away in July 2004. That was
yeah.
9.5 years roughly. But when you consider the first presidency plus the quorum of the 12 with no changes at all, that is the longest serving. Because on the
Oh,
one
whoa.
from the 1920s, 1930s, the first presidency had some changes,
Changed. Okay.
whereas in the 90s and early 2000s that stayed together for nearly a full decade with no changes, and you can kind of
Wow.
tell. Yeah, I know from kind of relatively direct sources of how significant that was in terms of providing a sense of unity and kind of common direction, and kind of removing some of the elements of change there. But with that came what we're experiencing now, that there was going to be a few waves of very rapid succession. And we had the first one when President Hinckley passed away, and a few followed. uh, Actually, President Faust had died a few months before. Then in 2015, I think it was that we lost Elders Packer and Scott and Perry
Cut.
in one go,
Perry,
in just one
yes.
conference. And then in 2018, when we lost President Monson and Elder Hales, which were the last two calls. And now we might be, in the next 2 to 3 years, we might be facing a similar reality, as we have quite a few that are 90 plus or in not so good health. But it's super interesting to see that and those dynamics. And also, something very peculiar. One question that I had is, are apostles always called in general conference, or have they been called at other
No, they had
times?
been called in. Yeah, they
Yes.
had been called. Yes, not.
Did you?
It's not a frequent thing though.
Yeah.
Those are one of the things that I find interesting. It's not like a mandatory thing, but it has happened. One would expect that happens in general conference, but there have been some exceptions. According to my understanding.
Yeah, there's an article that we'll also link to from LDS Daily that is called "Are Latter-day Saint Apostles Always Called During General Conference?" And you just gave the right answer, Danny. So, no, not always. It doesn't have to be that way. But the times that has happened, it's really, really, really infrequent. The
Rare.
last time, though, yeah,
Yes.
the last time is not that far away, though. It's Elder Holland. He was called um, right, well, in June 1994, I believe, which was when President Hunter took over as the
So
prophet.
he at that time he was the president of BYU, right? When
No,
he
I
was
think it was
called.
no, he was president of BYU until the late 80s, I believe. Then he was area president here in the UK. He used to live in
Okay.
Solihull, close to Birmingham, and that's where the headquarters were back then. And then he might have been here or maybe back in the US on another assignment as a 70, and then he was called.
Okay. And then he
But that,
was called. Okay.
yeah, that was off cycle though, and there were no extenuating circumstances, I believe. And the other previous time in recent years, recent with quotation marks, was Elder Maxwell, whom uh,
He was
took
called in the
the
70s or 80s.
early 80s, I believe 81,
Early
and
80s. Yes.
it was when the first presidency, all of them were quite ill, and they called a third counselor, which was President Hinckley. So when he was called
Mm.
as that third counselor, that left a vacancy in the Quorum of the
So
12,
they called
and they called Elder
Elder
Maxwell,
Maxwell.
whom, as we read in this article, he was in hospital then. He was getting some surgery, and he was called while there. And um, President Kimball visited him, and I think Elder Maxwell was still with some of the
Recovering.
effects of the anesthesia and all of that. So it was quite an interesting extension of the calling.
Okay. Okay.
And that was also off cycle. It was not during general conference. They were sustaining in the following one. Do you remember the first time of kind of sustaining an apostle, like a brand new one? Do you have any recollection of that, Danny?
Uh, well, I remember Elder Bednar. By the time they called her Elder Bednar, I think I
Might
just
have been on your
came.
mission.
Yes, I was in my mission.
Mm.
So, and then when I came home, he came to my stake for the stake conference. So it was very, very powerful. Like I mean, and I saw him as a very young apostle. So it was very significant for me to sustain him as an apostle. And then seeing him in my state conference, my local state conference in Villa Alemana in Chile, and coming just as a recently called member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So it was quite of an experience, I would say. And of course, I mean, we shouldn't, but we always have some preferred, members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
Are you saying
And Elder
you
Bednar
have favorites? You have favorites, Danny?
definitely is one of mine. So
Yeah,
I really like the way he talks and the way he addresses certain topics and how he conveys the message in a way that for me is very, very appealing. So I
yeah,
really like the way he's
yeah.
serving as a member of the
I
Quorum of Twelve
that is
Apostles.
the same one that I remember, like the first one, and I remember because I stayed at some friends. You know what? I might have stayed with my brother at the Vallejo's house. So
Oh,
at your wife's
really?
house
Yeah.
back then, yeah.
Yes, yes.
So I
When my wife
remember,
was not my wife, yes. When
yeah,
my wife
exactly. We
didn't
were all
know,
friends of your
yes,
existence.
what would have
Yeah.
happened? Yes.
So yeah, back then, for listeners, I was friends with Danny's wife's family for a long time because my brother is married to his sister-in-law. So yeah, I think I was staying there, and I remember taking the bus with my brother back to our stake center that Saturday morning. Like we stayed with them on Friday, just for some activities, I guess.
Random
We,
activities, yes.
and we arrived like 1 minute too late from the sustainings to the stake center. And because the first thing I remember walking into the stake center back then, this is pre-internet kind of broadcast.
So we had satellite
You had to go
dish.
there. Yeah, exactly. So I walk in and I see Elder Rugdorf and Elder Bednar walking to the stand. Like when they tell me that you can join
Yes.
us in the stand on that moment, and I see them, and I was like, no, I wanted to know who they were, and no
Yes.
smartphones, anything. I had to wait to go back home and kind of Google, and that's when I found out. And I knew neither of them, so I was like, "Oh, who are these
Nothing,
people?"
yes.
but yeah, so the speculation is on. I think that there's always a bit of what's healthy speculation and what becomes unhealthy, and you touch on some of those points that I wanted to touch on as well a little bit, and is that um, there's an expectation and kind of I would say righteous desire, kind of a nice to have aspiration that uh, certain groups that make up the body of the church would be represented. And very selfishly, I would love to see a member of the Quorum of the 12 that was a native Spanish speaker. I think I haven't done the count. I wanted to do it before the episode. I apologize because I couldn't, but I wanted to see what the percentage of native Spanish speakers, so people from Latin America and Spain mainly, uh, or Equatorial Guinea, which, by the way, they speak Spanish, former
They speak
Spanish colony
Spanish.
in Africa.
Yes.
I don't think we have anybody from there, though.
Yeah,
I
but
wanted to see what the proportion was, but I think we have a good couple dozen of members of the
but in terms of
70
membership,
there.
though,
Well,
I
yeah,
think
that too.
we're more Spanish speaking than English speaking in the total number of active members of the church. So I think it's
Oh, really?
yeah,
Or close.
or close,
Definitely a strong
or even
second.
yes,
But yeah,
yes.
yeah, that's a
So
good point.
we kind
And
of deserve it, right? I mean, we kind of for the sake of the audience, yeah, we kind
well,
of deserve
yeah,
an apostle that is Spanish speaking. I mean, I'm just kidding, but I think you get the gist there. I mean,
yeah,
uh, having
and I
a global church that has a very wide membership population that comes from Latin American or Spanish speaking countries, then of course you want to hear some accent, in
yeah,
the general
yeah,
conference.
yeah,
That's true.
and I might have shared this experience, but I want to share it again if I have done it before. I apologize. It's another one of our experiences from Chile when Elder Holland was presiding there, because I know of an anecdote when he was presiding the area, and over the first few months they were going on state conference visits, like apostles do and like area presidents do, to get to know the area, visit everything, and during those first few months, Elder Holland was loving that. Allegedly, I have good sources for that, but no reason to doubt that this anecdote is true. So that was happening, and he was loving it. He was like, "Oh, Chile is great. Everything's working out so well." And uh, well, that area presidency was constituted of a diverse group of leaders, one of which was from Latin America, and kind of knew some of the new local nuances of what was going on. And the advice from this leader was, actually, Elder Holland, like that's right. They're really nice, but this is not a
But
true. This is not a true reflection of what is going on. Like, they know you're coming. To be fair, this is not a Latin America specific thing. I think all states in the world, when they know that an apostle is coming, will probably over prepare for it and ensure that
you do housekeeping. You do
yeah,
housekeeping before, yes.
that's not, yeah, that's human nature. But but there was that kind of, I know my people. I know this is going on, so let's
Yes.
change the strategy. Let's go unannounced, and they started doing that, and that gave a very different version.
Surprises
Yeah,
came,
exactly.
yes.
Towards one of which I served on as a missionary. I remember I arrived a few months later, and they would tell me the story that they would arrive there, and sacrament meeting wouldn't start for like 20 minutes after the time, because people were late, the leaders were late, or sometimes they would just not show up, and very low attendance in wards that were reporting higher numbers and things like that, that were part of the reason why he probably went there or was sent there to see what the issues were with the local church. So
And let's not forget that Elder Oaks went to Philippines at that time. So I think
yeah,
those two areas had some
yeah,
issues going on. And then the church was concerned about how to help, right? How
yeah,
to find a better way to, to solve all these issues happening there. Yes.
yeah. Which, by the way, if we have any listeners with some firsthand experience during that time of President Oaks presiding there, I would love to hear some of those stories, because they overlap in time. So reach out
Yeah.
to us at
It
This
was
Week in
very, very
Mormons,
interesting.
yeah, on
I
our
remember
socials.
a very insignificant cue, but I remember Elder Oaks participating, I think, in a talk from Philippines area and wearing a short sleeve shirt, which
Yeah,
was
and
for
no jacket.
me absolutely, yeah, and no jacket, yeah. So it
Yeah,
was absolutely new. I haven't seen an apostle wearing a short sleeve
and
shirt in
and
my life,
Elder
so it was,
Oaks of all
yeah,
people,
another
Elder
Oaks,
Oaks.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it
Well,
was,
that's
yeah,
great. Well, speaking of apostolic succession again, one last comment from my side is there's a part of me that wishes that, um, how can I say this, that we as a church kind of were willing to, uh, how can I say this again, to break from tradition. And I know that there's a pattern in all things, and that there's a robust tradition of apostolic succession. Uh, but I think one of the downsides of our current approach that has been sustained for over a century uh, is that they serve for life, which I think is great. There is a lot of good that comes with it, and I appreciate it. I've been blessed by it. But then there's the flip side that they serve until a time where when it's probably really, really difficult. And I wish, that there was an option that they probably have it. I don't know that there's nothing in the
Abdicate,
scriptures that
like
says,
abdication.
yeah, like to become emeritus. Like if 70s can do it, and there are also special witnesses, probably with lowercase special witness, but in the Doctrine and Covenants they're also called special witnesses, and they become emeritus at a certain age. Maybe apostles could choose to retire and to become emeritus, and for one reason, I mean, for many reasons, probably that could have some positive effects. Of course, also other undesirable effects maybe, but where is the positive that I imagine? One is that when they pass away, we could fully turn our attention to look at their ministry, honor their lives, and pay tribute to them without the immediate, almost instantaneous uh,
Thought of who is going to come next.
speculation, yeah, and all the how do you say in English, the morbo, like the you know the
I mean, I was just thinking about what you said, and you know that in Spanish the word for retirement is jubilee, right?
yeah,
So the jubilee time of retiring from your earthly endeavors, and in this particular case for their spiritual endeavors as members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And then you start thinking, I mean, the church always tells us, I mean, we never retire until we're dead, which is all good. We're hardworking people, and we understand the concept of the work, and the worker is worthy of the salary and of the
yeah,
spiritual experiences and all. But if we're gonna grow in terms of people that are serving and people that are having leadership experiences, then members of the Quorum of 12 Apostles will also deserve some jubilee time, right, where they can take a step aside, enjoy and cherish with the members their ministry, but also seeing, the new generation or the new apostles serving and helping around. I think there's a time in life where you want to rest, and as we learn, from
yeah, from your
Genesis, right,
labors,
we
yeah,
work, yes, from the labors. We need to rest from our labors as well. And
for a
uh,
season.
I, a- and I think as a church also we're mature enough to understand that if they decide to take a step aside and then rest and enjoy their jubilee years, to
Yeah,
see how the church continues and grows, and calling new members and calling new members of the Quorum of 12 Apostles, and having that
yeah,
experience, even considering them as, external consultants, or as senior, consultants
yeah.
for but in a
I
role
mean,
that
I
is
mean,
less
it already
demanding.
it already happens with general authorities that are not apostles or members of the first presidency. Usually, uh, many of them continue serving if their health allows and if there's a need, as temple presidents, MTC presidents, or other functions that are not of a
Less
general,
demanding, right? Yes.
yeah, and that are more localized, probably less demanding, and a good transition after decades of serving full time as well. I think there's a withdrawal that some of them might experience, and they carry a wealth of experience, and in those roles they can usually serve much more alongside their spouses as well, which is also
Also
another topic
needed
of
and
what
welcome,
the
yes.
impact of being a general authority is on your family
On your
dynamics,
wife, yes.
on and your wife, and even on those older years, on children, grandchildren, and all the other
And great
generations that,
grandchildren.
yeah,
Yes.
that might not get to experience a granddad, a great granddad as much. So, food for thought. Please don't take our comments as sacrilegious. We're doing it in a spirit of respect and of healthy speculation. And and there's nothing in the scriptures that really prevents us from having this discussion or or wishing for some of these things. But we are also stand by our leaders, and we'll do our best to support them and do the best that they can do, despite being very very old.
Yes.
On that note, Danny, the last comment before moving to a rapid fire review of temple news and other news before we close. With all of this news comes the calling of Elder Holland as the acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
Even
Uh,
though Elder Oaks is the natural, because he's the oldest member of the Quorum of 12 Apostles, so he should be the acting president in the natural, tradition.
yeah,
Um,
if he were not
of
in the presidency, he would
yes,
be the
he would
actually
be.
he is
So,
the president of the Quorum of the 12, and Elder
but the
Holland
acting,
because
yes,
exactly. So, which is an interesting calling because it's as far as I understand. Please correct me, listeners, if I'm wrong. It's not a calling that's founded on kind of scriptural
doctrinal,
grounds, right? Right. It's and that's why it's there. However, I think it's functioned that way since the very beginning, as long as we can
forever.
go back
Yes,
to, and there's a pattern there that it's always been based on seniority. Now, going back to the same point that we were talking about before, I have to confess that I was a little bit worried about the calling, and it's on the same grounds that we were discussing before. President
E-
Holland now,
Elder
I need
Holland.
to
Yes.
get
Oh,
used to saying
yes,
President Holland again. We did it for 2 years
yes,
in Chile back in the day, but President Holland's health has been really difficult. Sister Patricia Holland
yes,
passed away just 3 4 months ago as well, and we know how rough that can be for anybody, right? and
yes.
and he hasn't spoken in the last couple of conferences because he was very ill. And
Sick.
even
He was
yesterday
sick.
he's
Yes.
yeah, and yesterday we learned that he was 3 of those weeks that he was in hospital a few months ago in a coma, unconscious. So he was quite close to to joining Elder
Yeah.
Ballard on the other side of the veil. So I was worried that, especially for this role that is called acting president of the Quorum of the 12, that, or in this particular case, or pattern or tradition or succession leads to calling probably the least physically able apostle to do it. And I wondered, and part of me wished, I hope he's not called. I hope this is a golden opportunity to um,
Take a
break
step
tradition,
aside,
I guess.
or yes, or as we said, maybe
Yeah.
asking for.
Yeah, even though I really wanted him to do it, like, because of my experience in Chile and all of that, we have a kind of a very unique kinship with him, but that happened, and I was quite worried. However, yesterday he spoke for the first time in public, in a public church setting in a long time. He spoke at the funeral of President Ballard, and much of that anxiety that I had about it was minimized.
Reduced.
He looked quite
Yes.
quite well compared to the expectations that I had, and he spoke really really well. It was, for me at least, it was the highlight of the service, with some of the
Okay.
anecdotes that he shared with Elder Ballard, kind of ministering to him when he was ill, and then in reverse these last few weeks. It was just a lovely talk, and he did look weaker, and he's older now, and after going through so much health issues, you would expect to see some lingering things. He was a bit shorter on breath, but I did see him very functional and 110% there, mentally, emotionally, and I was excited to see him that way, because even though he might not be very mobile physically,
I think
he's
it's
there.
very natural, Danny. It's very natural to think about the man, about the human, and as humans, we understand that with age, there are challenges natural to it, and I mean, President Nelson said that he's 99, and then doctors don't know what to do or how to treat him because there's no record, there's no reference
Yeah.
of people reaching that age so active. So, I mean, as someone that understands that as a society, as humans, we're going to live longer because we've got conditions, we've established base ground conditions that allow us to reach to an older age. That also means that we're respectful, we love this men, but we want them the best, and sometimes the best is for them to have an opportunity to engage in other activities, right? And but again, I think it's just, I hope, it's a matter of time where we see them in different roles, or having a time where they can work and serve, but not in the first line, and they
Yeah.
can also bless us in different roles, right? That
Yeah.
will also benefit them and benefit us as a global church. So, I mean, we're running out of time, and it's been a very
We
very
have,
short episode for us, at least. I
well,
hope
it
listeners
was
you're
big.
having a good time with us
It was
as
big
well, and you're
news.
not being bored. But
Yeah.
by our iterations on topics that are we consider relevant and critical to be discussed today. So we've
Oh,
got
yeah.
news about temples, and
Yeah.
let's talk about those three news of the temples, right? The first
All
one
right.
is Lima Los Olivos Temple Open House. And the good news about it is this is the first city outside Utah, right? Or Utah County that has more than one temple, which is historic. Okay. And I
Hmm.
think that's also showing the growth of the church in Peru. This is also showing that this is a global church,
Yeah.
and that it matters to think that members of the church worldwide need temples closer to them, right? And maybe I'm going to deviate just a second, but I think I've mentioned this before. I'm here in a very peculiar area in New York State, and the closest temple is 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes from here. And then the other closest temple I have is the New York City temple in Manhattan, which is 3 hours and a half. And then I have the closest other temple that I have is 3 hours and a half, and it's the Palmyra temple, right? All very interesting or attractive temples. But I have three kids, and I have my wife, and then there are no annex, or you don't have any, babysitters or daycares or something where you can go to a temple and leave your kids for 2 hours, as a temple might take. So it's been kind of a bittersweet experience because we've been to the Palmyra Temple, but of course we haven't been able to attend a session. But we've been there, we've been into the Sacred Grove, we've been to all these historic places, but we haven't been able to experience the full extent of the blessings and the benefit of going to these temples. And when I think of having a second temple in a reasonably big city as Lima, then you think, well, there are lots of members. These members have been using, their temple, the Lima Peru temple, for a while now, and
Yeah.
and
It's one
their
of the
their
earlier
their,
ones in
their
Spanish. Yeah.
worship, and yes, their worship and their adoration has led them eligible, to have a second temple. And I think it's just wonderful. It shows that the church is maturing in different settings, different from Utah, or different from Utah and Arizona and California, and then people from other places in the world are seeing the benefits of the growth of the church, and having temples, I think, is the biggest indication of that.
And not just that, the I think it's the South America Northwest area of the church, which is made up of Peru, I believe, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
that's correct.
Has been a lot. I mean, they have engaged on a lot of public relations and public affairs initiatives. I mean, that they've, for the last 2 3 years, have hosted this National Day of Prayer, multi faith event where they have joined with many other faiths. In one of those years, they did it on the grounds of the Lima Peru temple, and I think there was a news article back then that during that event they projected a Roman cross on the temple, in the night,
Oh.
in the evening, which was thought to be the first time that a Roman cross symbol was projected in an LDS temple, which was interesting. But a lot of things going on in that area, kind of reaching out beyond just the boundaries of the church, and this opportunity with the open house that just started, plus the dedication I think is scheduled for January next year. Elder Christofferson will do it. It's something to look forward to. The church has been growing significantly in Peru as well, at a rate that is of notoriety compared to some of the neighboring countries there, and it's really really great. I think they've passed the 100 stake threshold a while ago, or recently, but they're well past that threshold now, and the church is growing healthily in that area. So a
And
shout
then,
out to all of our Peruvian saints there and
yes,
elsewhere listening in.
and inevitably our bias as Chileans takes us to think that soon also Santiago de Chile will be another city
Yeah,
outside
yeah,
Utah,
yeah.
Utah State,
So
having
I
a
think,
second temple within the boundaries of the city, like
yeah,
two temples in the same city.
this will become the first non-Utah city to have that, but there are quite a few now that have been announced that are on the pipeline, and Santiago is one of those. I think can't remember the others, but I know that there's been a few around the world that have
Yes.
added their second city temple, which shows some interesting trends there. Another trend worth noting that I noticed is that the in recent years it has become more the norm than the exception that apostles dedicate temples rather than a member of the first presidency or the prophet, as it used to be very much the norm through all of church history
But
until this generation, these last
but
10
then
years,
again, I
maybe
think
5 years.
it leads to this idea that, I mean, we've been building temples and the growth has been exponential for the last 30 years. So then I don't think there's any, doctrinal basis
Yeah.
where we need the prophet or a member of the first presidency dedicating them,
Yeah.
by the mere fact that we've got an apostle or the prophet dedicating. They all hold the same keys that will allow them to do so, and
Uh, with
so
so many that are announced and that are going to be dedicated over the next few years, it's physically, you know, unreasonable that not just this prophet that is 99 years old, but any prophet will be able to travel that long. I mean, in a couple of years, we're probably going to have like a dedication every other week at least, and it's
hmm,
just not feasible. So it's a sign of the church kind of adjusting to that reality. And I think when they took away the cultural celebrations that used to be the norm as well prior to a temple and a temple dedication or rededication, I guess speaks of the faster pace at which we're building temples. On temple news, moving to the next one, conscious of time, the temple site for the Viña del Mar Chile temple was released. We talked about this city extensively in our first international episode back in June. So if you want to go back to that episode from June, listening why for Danny and myself this temple is so significant. We might have even teased, not teased, but we would have mentioned like, oh, imagine the day that the city might have a temple. Really unlikely because they just announced a second temple in Santiago in Chile, and boom, maybe we
boom,
predicted. Yeah, so
yeah.
Viña del Mar is a city where I was born, is a city where Danny has lived, and the temple that the site that they just announced is actually in downtown Viña del Mar, a lovely coastal city, about the third or fourth biggest city in Chile, and it's on the grounds of the current stake center and institute building, and I believe mission offices of the Viña del Mar
Which
mission.
is is a historical space. I mean, that space was where David O'Mackey's school, the school, a church school,
Yeah,
was functioning in the 70s, right? When the church, in its educational branches, was capable of bringing high quality education, for a very low, price
yeah,
to members and non-members of the church. So it was an interesting time, an interesting era for many founding, let's say, members or families of the church in the fifth region. So it was a historical place for them. Then it was the first stake center, and then, I mean, it's a very nice area. Also, it's a very old, like traditional Viña del Mar area, and we
yes, in the
were,
historical district, so to speak.
yes,
Yeah,
there is a cultural center there that is called Palacio Rioja, that also has a very nice architecture, and it in a way it's a reminiscent of the good old glory days of Viña del Mar, as
yeah,
a also as a vacational space for aristocracy that travel from Santiago to
yeah,
Viña del Mar to enjoy the nice weather and to enjoy the beach, and the
yeah,
retreat, and the whole experience. So we were um, thinking about how they're going to design and the architecture there, and how they're going to use the space. We're definitely thinking that the stake center probably is not going to be functioning there anymore, because even though the space is reasonable, is a very long, piece of
yeah.
land.
It's a very elongated uh,
Yes.
terrain. Yeah,
We were elucubrating how is it going to be, and how is it going to look, and we hope, our best expectation is that we see architecture that respects the area, and the architecture around it, and also it's a very nice neighborhood. So we think it's going to, bring the attention of local people and local news, and it will be
yeah.
an opportunity also, again, to talk about the church and to invite others,
which I
to
think is
come and see,
also
to come and share, to come and get to know us.
which seems to be also a bit of a trend. My last comment about this is that many of these newer temples, even some that have been dedicated over the last 10 years or so, have been more in urban city center type areas like the Philadelphia temple or even the recent one dedicated in Thailand, I think in Bangkok, quite kind of in the middle of the city rather than in more suburban areas with more like a wider landscape. Which is interesting. I think it plugs us more into some of those communities as well, especially the international ones. Well, to finish up, let's do rapid fire of the title and the gist of some of the other news. The last one about temples is Elder Stevenson dedicated the Okinawa temple. As I mentioned before, seems to be the norm now that apostles dedicate temples, which has been a gradual
But
but
there's
big change.
also, I think it's there's also this. Well, Elder Stevenson served the mission in Japan, so his
Yeah,
heart is with the members in Japan as well. So it's a wonderful opportunity. I think. I mean, it's a double, it's a double benefit for him
double
as
whammy.
an
Yeah,
apostle to dedicate, but also to meet with people. You know how powerful it would be, to dedicate a temple as a member of the Quorum of 12 Apostles and seeing, people you had the opportunity to teach the gospel, right? Being there, and
yeah,
I don't know, that is, it just melts my heart to think about it, to think about
yeah,
that experience as an individual, but then also as a representing uh, the prophet and representing Jesus Christ, right? So I
yeah.
think it's just very, very, very lovely.
A shout out to our Japanese fellow saints. I know a few from my years at BYU and some of the best people I've known. So, really happy for them. Rapid fire with other news. This one's quite interesting. We might get into it a bit more on the Patreon segment. Brazilian YouTuber interviews Elder Soares about his apostolic calling. This is on
And
the church news in Spanish. Yes.
I would like to highlight that this is not an LDS YouTuber, by the way. So
Yeah.
for the ones that might think that it's an LDS YouTuber, well, he's
Yeah,
not.
imagine the stereotypical kind of YouTuber that does explainers, and the thumbnails of the videos are very flashy, many colors, and they have this face of like, oh, surprise, like that type of YouTuber, kind of about 500,000 subscribers. And yeah, and he went to talk about what it means to be an apostle and what the church is about. I think the thumbnail is like first Brazilian apostles, who are the Mormons? Is a very general explainer, and I think it's worth noting this is the first, I might be wrong, but this is the first one that I see of very senior leadership, so apostles and kind of first presidency, engaging with alternative media, not with traditional media.
I
And
mean,
in this,
we covered recently Elder Bednar going to this summit, to this technological summit,
oh yeah, the Silicon
uh,
Slopes, yeah,
the Silicon Slopes. So that would
yeah,
be another alternative
yeah,
media.
yeah, not like going to, yeah, I see what you mean, but still it's a very very established kind of business community. Like in this case it's just a guy with a microphone, just like I look like now in the video, talking to other Suarez, which is quite interesting. Rather than going into what he talked about, I thought it was worth noting that there's an effort to reach out through channels that are probably going to be the ones dominating in the near future, with especially with
Yes.
younger generations, right? What are some of the benefits of this? Are there any risks to it? I think that a lot of it. Maybe could we have an apostle in visiting TWIM,
Twim.
the international TWIM? Who knows? Who knows? Anything could happen maybe now that they have set this precedent. So, Elder Suarez, you will be welcome to join us if you're listening.
If you're
I don't know if they
listening,
listen.
yes.
Yeah.
If you're listening, you're
Uh,
invited. Yes.
yeah. Next one, new family search features have been released. There's an article in the Church News talking about some of this. The first one is a feature called Your Impact. It's really cool. What it does is that if you have done indexing with your family search account, now you will be able to see what happened with the people whose names you indexed. Have they gone through the temple for their ordinances, etc. I find that quite cool because so far I felt like it's a little bit like a one-way input that what we provide when we do indexing and provide these inputs, and now to see the impacts, the fruits of your labor using scriptural language, I think is really nice.
And the second feature is get involved. And this is interesting because it's including, I mean, it includes AI, and the AI will do the work for you, and then you just, as a capture, probably you just check if the work that was done by the AI is correct, and then you kind of verify if it's at this point we understand that AI is everywhere, and I don't know, from bots that are answering your questions in, I don't know, customer service web pages, to ChatGPT, and
Hmm.
through any other AI platform where you, I don't know, create art or audio or video. It's just interesting to see that the church is also considering, because
Yeah.
there's no other way around. I mean, this is coming to stay, and it's going to make, hopefully, our lives easier, and it's going to make us, reduce the time we invest in endeavors that are mechanical, or they're not, that
Yeah. Maybe the
they're
days of
simple tasks.
indexing. Yeah.
Yes,
The
and,
days
and
of indexing
indexing.
might be over. Yeah.
Yes,
Eventually.
so
Right.
it's an opportunity for us to understand that these steps are natural steps and they're beneficial. And if we see them as an opportunity to reach uh, a wider group of people that are there waiting for us to do the work, the work
Yeah.
of salvation, then it's just, if we're using the right tools, then of course is more
Yeah.
than needed and welcome and necessary. So,
It
um,
it made me think now. I have a talk to give tomorrow at church that I still need to fully prepare, and I thought, oh, maybe I can use AI and go and ask prepare a talk for me. I'm thinking of righteous uses. Would that be righteous
yes,
though? I'm not quite sure, but
I mean,
I know
what you
people
get
that have done
is
it
general
though.
ideas. No,
Yeah,
but you
yeah,
get general ideas, and then you can build up from there. I think sometimes the most difficult thing for anything is just a blank page. So when you have some ideas laid out there,
Hmm.
then it allows the inspiration. It's like you're not going to be inspired if you have anything in your head, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you're not going to remember scriptures if you don't know the scriptures, right? So
yeah,
I think this idea of having some topics or some bullet points in a blank page is always
yeah.
useful for developing or allowing the spirit to prompt you what to do next, or what to include in your talk. So
And it would
I
be
think it's
interesting.
very, very late. It's very,
Yeah,
very late. We've been here for a very, very long time. I hope, dear listeners, you're bearing with us. I hope people that are watching us on YouTube are also bearing with us. We had a wonderful time. I had a wonderful time. I'm talking about, I'm including Danny, because I hope that he had a good time as well today. This is always a great opportunity for us to share our insights and our opinion about uh, the church, and of course news related to a church, and our testimonies of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I'm
yeah.
really, really
Thank you.
happy we're doing this.
Thank you, Danny, for that. I think it was a great discussion, and I thought the listeners think the same. We have a few more articles to cover, but for that, we invite you to join This Week in Mormons on Patreon, where you're going to have 15-minute episodes with where we go even deeper on some of these topics, or where we cover some other articles. For example, did you know that the new Minister of Economy of Ecuador is a member of the church? She was a missionary, and that was all over the news over there. Or some of the other news that we'll leave there here for now, and we'll go to Patreon to cover them. But thank you very much for joining us today. Hope to see you soon in another international episode before the end of the year, hopefully. And if not, have a happy new year, I guess. We may see you actually in January. We'll see. We'll see. We'll keep you there on your toes. But Danny, thank you very much. Have a great Thanksgiving, and follow us on social media, on Twitter or X, on Facebook, on everywhere you can find us. And if you have any feedback for this episode or anything else, or you want to see anything on these international episodes, you want to be a co-host maybe, or share some of your international experience, reach out to contact at thisweekimormons.com. Looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much, Danny. Have a good evening, have a good night, have a good
You
morning, wherever
too.
you are.
Enjoy.
Bye
Have a
bye.
wonderful Sabbath. Bye bye.
Bye.